Tonight we'll continue on with chapter 4 of the Footsteps of the Messiah. And last Wednesday, I think, when we started this, we only really did the first two of the 9 pre-tribulation events. The first two being World Wars I and II. And then also the second part of that is the re-establishment of Israel. Tonight we're going to at least do the number 3 there, which is Jerusalem under Jewish control. And then also tonight will be the big one that is probably the biggest chunk out of this particular chapter, and that's probably what we will spend the rest of tonight looking at, which is the Northern Alliance invasion of Israel. So we're going to look at that, and then Lord willing, next Wednesday we should finish the rest of those 4 pre-tribulation events in the chapter 4 of the Footsteps of Messiah. So that's what we'll do tonight, is the number 3 and 4. Number 3 and 4. So when we're looking at Jerusalem under Jewish control, and that's the third pre-tribulation event, and what that involves, of course, is what that presupposes is that, of course, that in terms of prophecy, the state of modern Israel has to exist before the tribulation. So, as we talked about last Wednesday, of those different views, a lot of the views get stuck at in regards to the state of Israel in its modern state, and they have a difficult time in trying to fit that in, especially in regards to the gathering of the Jews. Now, when we look at the this Israeli War of Independence, and that happened, of course, in 1948 and 1949. We had the Israeli forces that were in control of the West Jerusalem. And I've just drew a map there. If you're looking at it now, it's probably easier as I'm explaining it. And so what you had there is, of course, during that 1948 and 1949, that X, that marked spot there. So there's West Jerusalem area. And then there's the old city of Jerusalem, which is the old. When it refers to the old city of Jerusalem, it's talking about the biblical city in regards to when it comes to biblical prophecy. So the Israeli forces took control of the West Jerusalem area, which is just where that arrow is, West Jerusalem is. But the old city of Jerusalem still fell into the hands of the Jordanian or the Jordan Legion forces, and during that period they still held control of that, and that was later annexed into what they call the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. So in reality, Jerusalem, although even that happened in 1948 and 1949, Jerusalem became a divided city. And that pretty much remained that way for the next 19 years. So, in terms of the third tribulation event, that's the event that we're talking about now, is the Jerusalem that's under Jewish control. So that's what we're talking about in terms of the third pre-trib event that we're talking about. Jewish control of Jerusalem. Now, why is Jewish control over the city, or the old city of Jerusalem, important? Well, it's important because it's what prophecy or biblical prophecy says it would happen. So prophetically, the old city of Jerusalem had to fall under Jewish control. And we can get this or deduce this from the prophecies dealing with what they called the third temple, or third Jewish temple. And that's sometimes known as the Tribulation Temple. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar with what I mean by the third temple, Remember, the first temple was the Solomon temple. Okay, that was established during Solomon's time. And then the second temple was established during Jesus' time. Remember, that's the one that was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. And then when we're talking about the third temple, we're talking about this will be the third attempt by the Jews to rebuild this temple. And that's what we refer to as the Tribulation Temple, or the third Jewish temple. So then, just so that some of you that might not be familiar with that, that's what we're talking about here in terms of the third temple. Now, the reason, of course, why, just to explain a little bit further, the reason why, of course, the temple was destroyed when Jesus prophesied is, remember, when Jesus came, there's no more need for a temple. Now, of course, when Jesus came, what happened was the Jews, or the Jewish leaders at that time, rejected Jesus. So they rejected Jesus. They didn't see him as the fulfillment of the prophecies, and so that's really the first coming that they should have recognized. You see, the issue now with the Jews today is because they rejected Jesus back then. Remember, they still have to do the Mosaic law, and if they don't accept Jesus as the atonement, of course, then they have a problem, because they still have to carry out the rituals, and they needed a temple in order to do that. And so that's what, because they rejected Jesus, if they had accepted Jesus, there's no need for that temple. But because they're still waiting for the first coming of the Messiah, they're still waiting for Jesus, but what they're going to get a rude awakening to is that it'll be the same Jesus that will come back that they think is the first one. Then they'll realize it's the one whom they rejected back in the New Testament day. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the third Jewish temple, and that's sometimes known as the Tribulation Temple. Now, there's 4 passages there over here. So there's 4 passages of Scripture that speak of a specific event in relation to the Tribulation Temple, and this will occur in the middle of the tribulation. So that's the line of that's the line that Arnold follows, of course. But we'll look at those different views. But here, these are the passages that Arnold is giving that will say that the third temple will be up by the middle of tribulation. Now, there was a good Margaret and her sister Esther sent me a link. They had a YouTube clip that had some of the Jews over there in Israel at the moment trying to begin a lot of those sacrifices in front of the old temple. So they're already in preparation for the third temple. And one of the Orthodox Jews there was outrightly rejecting that Jesus is not their Messiah. This is Jesus of the Bible, because that was who the interviewer was asking, and they basically are waiting for the first coming of the Messiah. So these are the 4 passages here. So in Daniel 9:27 is first of the 4 passages, and let's just read that. And this is in regards to that Tribulation Temple. It mentions the Tribulation Temple. That's what it speaks of in each of these 4 verses, and that's what it's talking about. But let's read these verses, each of them. So in Daniel 9 verse 27, and he shall make a firm covenant with many for 1 week, and in the middle of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And upon the wing of abomination shall come one that makes desolate, and even unto the full end, and that determined shall wrath be poured out upon the desolate. So in Matthew 24:15, so when therefore you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, let him that reads understand. In 2 Thessalonians 2:3-4, let no man beguile you in any wise, for it will not be, except the falling away come first. Of course, that falling away we talked about earlier is the apostasy of the church. And the man of sin be revealed, being the Antichrist, the son of perdition, he that opposes and exalts himself against all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he sits in the temple of God, setting himself forth as God. So that's mentioning the temple as well. In Daniel's 29:27, in that first verse that we're talking about, in the middle of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. So that's that verse there, sacrifice and oblation to cease, is talking about obviously sacrifices and rituals that's happening in the temple. So that's prophesizing that there will be a obviously by then the third temple should already been rebuilt. But look at the timing in that verse. It says in the middle of the week. Now, how many days in a week is 7? How many days is the covenant being signed for? 7 years. And 3.5 years is the middle of the week. So that's talking about mid-tribulation. So that's the view that we're talking about here. So in the fourth passage there is Revelations 11, verses 1 to 2. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and one said, Rise, and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein, and the court, which is without the temple, leave without, and measure it not. For it has been given unto the nations, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 40 in 2 months. So all these passages are speaking of the third Jewish temple that, or what they call the Tribulation Temple, will be rebuilt. But more will be covered on this in the next chapter, which is chapter 5. But now, I guess it's a good confirmation that we can confidently say that the Jewish temple, there will be a third Jewish temple that will be rebuilt. I guess that's the main point, and it will begin to function again. And the reason is that because if they've rejected Jesus, or Israel or the Jews rejected Jesus back in Jesus' time, then they still need a temple to continue doing the rituals under the Mosaic law. But what these verses point to is that it automatically presupposes that that there's Jewish control of the temple. I guess that's the main point there, eh? So what it's saying is that the temple compound is under Jewish control. And so the reason why that's important, because under prophecy it's saying that the Jews before that time will have control of the old city of Jerusalem. That's the point there. Now, if we look at those passages again, I mean, in the question in your study guide, it says, when would the third birth pang be fulfilled? Now, the third birth pang is the one we're talking about here, which is the Jewish control of the temple. But none of these passages actually spell out a time factor as to when this will occur. Now, remember the 6-Day War that we talked about, and the 6-Day War itself wasn't actually the 6-Day War wasn't actually predicted in the scriptures. So that in itself, that particular war wasn't, but what it accomplished did. So even though the 6-Day War wasn't in scriptures in terms of its prediction of it, but what the 6-Day War did is that it brought about the fulfillment of the prophecy regarding the Jewish control of the old city of Jerusalem. So the 6-Day War is when they brought it about, and that's what led to the fulfillment of this third major pre-trib event. So it was after the 6-Day War that this third major pre-tribulation event was fulfilled. So that's when the third pang happened, was after the 6-Day War. Now, what we have here then is, although the first three of these events, so we already looked at the first three events has been fulfilled, so that was World War I and II. Then the second was the modern state of Israel was established, and then the third one here is the old city of Jerusalem is under Jewish control. And so those are the first three prophecies or pre-tribulation events have been fulfilled, out of the 9. Now, the next, so that's the first 3. The next 6 that we will be covering are still future, So these haven't happened yet, the next 6 that we will be talking about. And the one that we're going to be talking about now is there's Ezekiel 38 and Ezekiel 39 up to verse 16. We'll be looking at these 2 chapters tonight, really. That's what we'll be chewing on tonight, is just on this 4th pre-tribulation event that's to come, and it's called the Northern Alliance Invasion of Israel. And so we're going to be looking at those 2 Ezekiel passages and look at how that's the exposition of those passages. So that's what we'll be chewing on tonight, So let's look at Ezekiel 38, verses 1 to 6. And the word of Jehovah came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face toward Gog, of the land of Magog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and prophesy against them, and say, Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. And I will turn thee about, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, and all of them clothed in full armour, a great company with buckler and shield, all of them handling swords. Verse 5. Persia, Cush, and Put, with them, all of them with a shield and helmet. And then in verse 6, Gomer, and all his hordes, the house of Togarmah, in the uttermost parts of the north, and all his hordes, even many peoples with thee. Now, we look at verses 1 to 4. We look at the attention that's centered on that verse there is Gog. And who is Gog? Well, Gog is the leader of the land of what they call the land of Magog. And he is the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. And who Gog will be can only really be determined at the time of the invasion for Gog. So it's thing to remember is Gog is not a proper name. Gog is just a title, simply like, for example, a title for a ruler. That's what Gog is mentioned here for. So Gog is the ruler of Magog, just like how Pharaoh is the ruler of Egypt, and then you have Tsars, Rasputin for Russia and all that. So Gog is just a title for a ruler. So it's not a proper name. Now, whoever's ruling this alliance at the time of the invasion will be Ezekiel's Gog. Now, if we look at the identification of who Magog, Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal is, we can look at that. How do we determine those names? Those can be determined from the fact that these tribes from the ancient world, that's what we are looking at, occupied the area. So from a geographical point of view, that's how we can trace who those people are in terms of the areas they occupied. And the areas that this tribe occupied in terms of modern day today is Russia. So that's the areas that we're looking at. So Magog, Meshech, and Tubal were between the Black and Caspian Seas, and that's today is known as southern Russia. And it also includes parts of Iran and Turkey, is what you will see as well. Now, according to some, the tribes of Meshach and Tubal later gave names to cities that today bear the names of Moscow, the capital, and then Tobolsk is a major city in the Urals in Siberia. So Rosh was in what is now people know as northern Russia. So that's probably where you get the name Rosh, is the basis for the modern name of Russia, Rosh, Russia. So what you see is then, where is Russia in terms of relation to Israel? Well, these names cover a lot of these modern territories that we know of today in north and southern Russia. And then, of course, Siberia to the east of Asia. So in terms of what Ezekiel is saying, this area that Ezekiel knows as Rosh, for today we know as Russia, covers all of these areas from a geographical point of view in terms of what Ezekiel is explaining here. Now this is really just to avoid that, really there's no question that's what it's referring to here, right? So in terms of that's what we can determine, that Ezekiel passage is talking about Russia. Now, just to be clear, you will see that in verse 6. You will look at verse 6. It adds another addition just to make sure that point is without a doubt. It says that these come from the uttermost parts of the north. And then that's repeated again in Ezekiel 38 verse 15 and also in Ezekiel 39 verse 2. Because if you look at from Israel from a geographical point, the uttermost parts of the north is Russia in terms of from where Israel is. And actually, if you draw a straight line, Moscow is north from Jerusalem. So there is that you'll see that in terms of Russia will then be the leader of this confederacy that will invade Israel. So Gog is the leader of Russia. So whoever we don't know who will be in power of Russia at this time. It may be who the current person, but the main thing is that the point is that whoever is going to lead this particular group would be that person that's mentioned here, would be the leader of Russia at that time. Now, we also know that there's a rabbinic view in regards to this as well. And so there's a thing that they call the art Scroll Commentaries, which also commentary on this as well. And it's good to get their points on that too. But Goanim is a tradition that these controls also were located in Russia. So this is from the Art Scroll Commentary. And it says that when the Russian Navy passes through the Bosporus, that is on the way to Dardanelles, it will be time to put on Sabbath clothes in anticipation of the coming of the Messiah. And so that's in the rabbinic writings. It's kind of a hard case that as you read these guys interpreting those scriptures, that they missed the real Messiah that came the first time, and here they're expecting still the first coming of the Messiah. So what we see is that in the Gog and Magog war, Messiah, the son of Joseph, will be killed, and which will then bring the coming of the Messiah, the son of David. Now, what we also see there is that in that through that quick map, just so then easier for us to have a look at that. So apologies for my inaccuracies there, but I didn't have time to. I'll just quickly put that in there for us tonight anyway. But what we see there is that Russia is not alone. It's not just Russia that will be alone in the invasion of Israel, because we know that Russia is part of a confederacy, and they will be the leader of it. So they will lead these other nations. So in verses 5 to 6, you'll see listed in those verses is now we'll see who are these other nations that are going to be involved. So involved in the confederacy is Persia. If you should have numbered them. So Persia, or present day, is Iran. So Iran, or Persia, is present day Iran. Now, Iran used to be, for those that probably weren't familiar, but Iran was generally pro-Western and actually pro-Israel. But after the Khomeini Islamic Revolution, Iran became anti-Western and then anti-Israel. And then, of course, with Russian influence in that area, they became very anti-Israel. But they used to be very pro-Western, and they're also very pro-Israel. But it changed after the Khomeini Islamic Revolution. Now, Israel, I think today and recently, and they basically consider Iran as its most dangerous enemy. And I don't think it surprises anyone with Iran's current political turmoil they're going through at the moment too. Now there's another nation mentioned as well. That nation involved is called Cush. At the bottom there, Cush is Ethiopia. Now, Arnold's given that because there's two places that had that name, and he's basing that in terms of the geography in ancient times. And Cush had one of those names was in Mesopotamia, and that was in Genesis 2:13. But all of the other usages for this word Cush always refers to Ethiopia. But that's just to, and this is because Arnold's is sticking to the biblical context in terms of that. But what's happened is that name Cush, for some of the others that are into Bible prophecies, they've been tempted to identify to use that as Syria and Iraq. But if you want to be consistent in the way that word is used throughout the scriptures, Cush elsewhere in the scriptures, that it identifies itself with Ethiopia. So that's the stance in terms of from where Arnold is starting from, is using the biblical context. But the others have used it Syria and Iraq, but here the difference is Arnold saying that it's Ethiopia, because he's using the word Cush as a consistent word that's used in scriptures to identify Ethiopia. It's also another example where I've also been watching a few Bible prophecy teachings from some of the others. A lot of them are using a lot of the current affair events to try and fit that in. But remember, we never use current affairs, no matter how they are, to dictate scriptures. We always use scriptures first, and then use current affairs to fit into scriptures, not the other way around. And so that's the use here as well. Now, put is the next one. Now, that's also sometimes been interpreted by some as being Libya. But again, the name, if Libya was to be used, then they would have used the name Lub, L-U-B. Lub would be used instead of Put. But Somaliland, or Somalia, is what Put would represent, and that just borders on Ethiopia. So Somalia would be Put. Now this is also followed by Gomer. If you go further up there to the top left there, you'll see Gomer appears, and that's located in present-day Germany. In Germany. Now this was also a view of the rabbinic view, what they called the Midrash. The Midrash called Gomer Germania. So Germania was also a name that the rabbinic... so, I mean, the point is, I guess, so that we're not confusing any other country, but Gomer is Germany. And the Talmud always refers Germany as, or Germania as Gomer. Now the last one is Togarmah, and that's represented by present-day Armenia. Armenia is just at the bottom of Russia there, right? In between Russia and Israel and Iran. But Armenia is present-day Armenia, is Togarmah. Now verse 6 adds the phrase, even many peoples with you. Now this phrase may just define the numbers of the nations already mentioned, and it also may include other nations that's not mentioned, but the probability is that the former is what it's meant. So there may be other nations involved as well, but this phrase can also be used just to simply define the numbers, which is what we're talking about there. So in terms of answering who is involved in this confederacy, who is involved, it's Russia and the allied states of Iran, Ethiopia, Somalia, Germany, and Armenia, in terms of what we're talking about here. Now there's one interesting observation about this invasion that we need to note here. Not sure if anybody's picked up there. Have you noticed that just when you're looking at that map, that not one single Arab nation is participating in this invasion? There's no Arab nation participating in this invasion, which is interesting. Now remember, while some of the nations listed here are Muslim, they are not Arab. Remember, Persia are not Arabs, so don't get them confused. So there's no Arab nations participating in this. Another observation to make is that these nations are geographically located both north and south of Israel. North and south of Israel. But Russia is the one that's the controlling nation, and I guess they form alliances with the Muslim nations and also the non-Arab states. Now, what we see here definitely is the invasion itself. The majority of the invasion is from the north. Right? So that's where the large part of the forces coming to invade Israel is coming from the north. Now there's just a note to make here is that there's also been quite a common error made in previous interpretations of this passage, in that many have assumed that this passage is talking about a communist invasion. But nowhere in the text is saying that anything to do with a communist invasion. It's just simply, and this is because after the fall of communism in Eastern Europe, remember? And I think that led to a lot of them abandoning the Russian interpretation of this passage, but there's really no need to. The main point is that the text, what we've got to notice, the text itself doesn't describe the type of government when this invasion occurs. So it doesn't matter it doesn't indicate whether it's a monarchy, a socialistic, or communistic, or democratic, or even a dictatorial government. The main point here, or the focus, is on the geography. Does that make sense? So it's the geographic area, not the type of government. So often, most of the newspaper exegesis or current views focus on the type of government, and what happens is that's not the focus here. The focus is, regardless who's in power, the scriptures are saying it's from the north geography. Okay, so whoever it is, it's that geography, and those are the geographies that we've covered here. So while the names of these geographical areas may have changed over the centuries, example, Persia has now become Iran. You can see that as an example. And then it may change again. But the geography itself always remains the same. The geography itself always remains the same. Right? So it's these geographical areas that we need to take note of. So who is the one responsible? Who's the one responsible for this invasion? It's Russia. So Russia will be the leading. One will be the one that will be leading this confederacy. So whatever name it's going to be called at whatever time in the future, the main thing is that it would be from that geography area. And remember, they used to be known as the Soviet Union. Now they're known as Russia. Their names may change again, but whoever it is at that time, that's who would be responsible for this invasion, from the north. Now, there's an Orthodox Jewish commentary as well from the Art Scroll on Ezekiel 38:2, and they make this observation. And Yerushalayim, Megillah, that's verse 3, verse 9 from their commentary. And it says that, which renders Magog as Gutia or Gutcha, the Goths, a group of nomadic tribes who destroyed the Scythians and made their home in Scythian territory. Considering that the Goths were a Germanic people, the identification of Magog's descendants as the Goths, in accord with Targum Yonasan to Genesis 10, verse 2, which renders Magog as Germania, which in the Beer Rabbah 37:1 is given as Germania. So that's just confirming that, and this is just from their commentary, that they've always confirmed, in terms of the commentary on Ezekiel 38:2, have always confirmed it to be Germany as well. And so what we're getting here is that the cup of iniquity of Russia is almost full. So, and it's with this invasion that God is using that as it will overflow in terms of this cup of iniquity from Russia's point of view. And this will lead to God's judgment on Russia. And I guess the main point there being is that God is still in control, even though these nations are about to invade Israel. And if God is in control, it's actually God who's bringing this invasion about. That's actually what's highlighting here. So when we're studying this passage, we probably need to note or be reminded of the sovereignty of God in terms of this invasion, because this will be the means by which God will punish Russia for her sins. And the key sin is the key sin that Russia really is why God wants to mete out punishment on Russia, and God is using this invasion for him to do that. Is if you go back and study history, the history of how the regards to a lot of the crimes committed against the Jews, Russia has a long history of anti-Semitism with the pilgrims, or the pogroms is what they call them. And that problem is also still happens today in Russia, is the anti-Semitic issues that they have always had against the people that God has chosen. So that's one of the reasons for this invasion, is for God to be able to punish Russia for her sins. And the key sin here is anti-Semitism. Next passage that we should read next is what's the object of the invasion? What's the objective? And the other thing to note too is before we go here, there's things that we're going to bring out, and that's regards to how we're going to look at the exposition of that, is that we're going to approach these passages with who, where, why, what, and how, and then of course when. So we already covered who, and Ezekiel 38:1 to 6 that we just read, that helped us look at who. It was Russia and some of those other nations that we looked at, with Germany, Somalia. And so here, in terms of the object of the invasion, we're going to look into that question as where will this invasion take place, is what we'll be looking at. So in verse 7, be thou prepared, yea, prepare thyself, though in all thy companies that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. After many days they shall be visited. In the latter years there shall come into the land that is brought back from the sword, that is gathered out of many peoples, upon the mountains of Israel, which have been a continual waste, but it is brought forth out of the peoples, and they shall dwell securely, all of them. And thou shalt ascend, thou shalt come like a storm, thou shalt be like a cloud to cover the land, thou and all thy hordes and many peoples with thee. Now this passage continues to address Gog as the leader of this confederacy in verse 7. And you look at verse 8, it tells us the specific place where the invasion takes place. And the specific place is the land of Israel. But more specifically, it's talking about the mountains of Israel. So that's the specific place that we're going. That's where it's going to happen. Then in verse 9, it's describing the massiveness of this invasion, and it's picturing it as a storm cloud that covers the whole land. I mean, that's a sight, So there's also another passage that confirms, or again, it assumes that there's a necessary, before this would happen, that there has to be an establishment of the Jewish state. That also points to this as well. But remember, this is a regathering in unbelief. This is a regathering in unbelief. Israel has to be a state before this invasion can occur. Now, regardless of what one's viewpoint as to when this invasion occurs, each viewpoint really requires the pre-existence of the Jewish state. So remember with the last views that we talked about in the last on Wednesday, a lot of them had issues with the Jewish state. But here, when we read these verses, when he talks about this invasion, regardless of what viewpoint you have, in order for them to attack Israel in this way, Israel has to be an established state. You can't just attack a non-state. You can't attack just a group of nomads in the bush somewhere. It has to be a Jewish state that you're attacking. So here in this passage, Israel is regathered in unbelief, because only after this invasion, what we see is that many in Israel will turn to the Lord, which is another reason why this invasion will happen. Because after this, those that they're gathering in unbelief, but a lot of them will turn to the Lord after this event. So this is just another passage that demands a restored Jewish state in unbelief. Now, verse 8 there describes the Jewish state as being, there's four things that in verse 8 describes, four things about the Jewish state. The first thing is it's a land brought back from the sword. And the second thing, it's a land that is gathered out of many peoples. The third thing, it's a land with mountains that have been a continual waste. And then the fourth thing is a land that is brought forth out of the peoples. Now, what Ezekiel is actually explaining here is that he's not explaining or describing an Israel that ever existed in ancient times. Israel was not in the way that Ezekiel is describing here. And so when Ezekiel is describing this, Israel in its state at that time and even in ancient times never fit this description. But all of these statements that Ezekiel is talking about here now fits today. Fits a true of present day Israel today. So this actually began occurring toward the end of the 19th century, again, the 19th century, and leading to the statehood in 1948. And then since then, the waste places have been rebuilt. So a lot of waste places have been rebuilt and resettled on a more massive scale. There. Right, next one is Gog's goal. Now, Gog being the leader of the northern of this confederacy, and here we ask ourselves why. Okay, so we've looked at where it would happen. Now we're looking at why. Ezekiel 38, verse 10-13. Why is this invasion taking place on the part of Russia? Why is Russia invading? Verse 10. Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, it shall come to pass in that day, that things shall come into thy mind, and thou shalt devise an evil device. And thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell securely, all of them dwelling without walls, and having neither bars nor gates, to take the spoil and to take the prey, to turn thy hand against the waste places that are now inhabited, and against the people that are gathered out of the nations, that have gotten cattle and goods, that dwell in the middle of the earth, Sheba and Dedan, and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take the spoil? Hast thou assembled thy company to take the prey? To carry away silver and gold, to take away cattle and goods, to take great spoil. So the question is, why did Russia want to invade Israel? The key reason for the Russian invasion is because of spoil, and that's in verse 10-12. Exactly what Russia has that Russia would want is not spelled. Well, it's not spelled out in the text. This text simply mentions cattle. What else does it mean? Cattle, goods, silver, and gold. But these are actually general Old Testament references, and it usually refers to spoils of war. Spoils of war. So it's a matter of spoil is the reason why Russia wants to invade Israel. Now, there's been a lot of speculation around, what is it that Israel has that Russia would want one. I've heard lots of different theories in regards to coal, that Germany has a pipeline. So there's lots of theories out there. But the text here doesn't really spell it out, though. But the main gist of it, it's talking about the spoil. So whatever Russia has, it's after. There's another popular reason that's given as well that I've heard out there. Is the Dead Sea itself contains something like 45 billion tons of sodium, chlorine, sulfur, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and bromide. So that's one reason. But Arnold's given the reason that, if Russia wanted that, they don't have to invade Israel. They can just go. They can just get to the Dead Sea by invading Jordan, which is the other area. I mean, if you look at Israel there in the middle there, Jordan is just on the right of Iran, right on the border of Israel. So if they wanted to, actually there's a bit of mapping before that. Yeah, there, that one. The Red Sea there, the Dead Sea in the middle there. So there's lots of reasons. And I guess and there's another reason also in regards to oil crisis that's around. There is a bit of an oil crisis in the Middle East at the moment, and maybe the reason for the invasion might be to gain some more oil, or gain a solid foothold in the Middle East. Now, if you look at it too as well, remember there's a whole lot of nations that just don't want Israel to exist. So if you have a Russian takeover of Israel, it would give Russia quite a big foothold there without upsetting the Arabs, because they would be in favor of the destruction of Israel, even if it means a Russian army in the area. But even though that may be true, that the Arabs would like to see Israel destroyed, I don't think they would be entirely favourable on having a full Russian occupation right in the middle there. I don't think they would like that idea as well. But the main thing here is that the text itself is silent in terms of the content of the spoils. So we know it's the spoils, but we don't know what exactly it is. The main point is, I guess, is there is a reason that they're going to invade Israel, and it's because of spoils, whatever that is. So God's goal, again in those verses that we looked at, it's for this reason that the spoils that Russia invades. But the main thing is, whatever people say that the reasons are, the main thing is the actual reason will be Russia's own self-interest, whatever that is. So whatever it is, it's for their own self-interest is why they will invade Israel. In verse 13, you'll see a second group of nations are listed as protesting in this. What's verse 13? It says, Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish, with all the young lions thereof, shall say unto thee, Art thou come to take the spoil? Hast thou assembled thy company to take the... missed out on the verse there, right? Take away the goods, to carry away silver and gold, and take away cattle and goods, or to take great spoil. So there's a protest by other nations as Russia takes this invasion, which will be interesting. So let's look at what are the three possibilities anyway. Who are these nations coming out of Tarshish saying? So there's three places, there's three such places known in history, and one of these places is located on the east coast of Africa, but the exact location is actually unknown. But that particular area that's referring here, or Arnold refers to here, that hasn't spawned any other nations. However, the second one, or the second place, was in Spain. So that's founded by the city of Tyre. And if this is the Tarshish of Ezekiel, that would mean that the nations spawned from Tarshish would include those of Central and South America, except for Brazil. So that's the second place that's a possibility. Now the third location is England. And so if Tarshish is meant to be that would also include, because it's talking about nations were spawned from there, it would also include the US, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, and also other present-day Western democracies. So it might even include the whole of the British Commonwealth nations. But I guess the main point is, if you look back at those passages, is that if there's any conclusion that can be reached in terms of Ezekiel's usage anywhere else, the consistent usage would be that it would have to be Spain, in the Spanish-speaking world or the Western Hemisphere. So that's probably, in terms of the possibilities, there's probably more Spain. But the point is that these nations are the ones that are protesting against the invasion. I mean, it's easy to see America would probably protest against this as well, and also England. But the point is, it's saying that when Russia does this, these other nations that's mentioned in verse 13 protest against what's happening. But the point is that we know that in the later verses that Israel anyway succeeds in invading anyway. They still go ahead and invade. So whatever protesting the other nations are having, it doesn't really help with stopping this confederacy anyway from going in and invading Israel. So they may protest, but it appears that they don't do anything to stop them. So we just saw Gog's goal. Now we're going to look at God's goal. And God's goal. And Ezekiel 38:14 to 16. Therefore, Son of man, prophesy and say unto Gog, Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, In that day when my people Israel dwelleth securely, shalt thou not know it? And there shalt come from thy place out of the uttermost parts of the north, thou and many peoples with thee, all of them riding upon horses, a great company and a mighty army. And thou shalt come up against my people Israel, as a cloud to cover the land. It shall come to pass in the latter days, that I will bring thee against my land, that the nations may know me, when I shall be sanctified in thee, O Gog, before their eyes. So we see that invasion is what we see here. It's actually started and it's begun, but also further answers the question as to why. And this time it's seen from God's point of view. So we kind of saw that hints at Russia's reason for doing it. It's for the spoils. But here in these verses 14 to 16a, we see God's point of view of why he's allowed this invasion to happen. Just remember, at the end of the day, God is sovereign, and he would have allowed this to happen. So why did Russia invade Israel from God's viewpoint? Now, God's reason is given for allowing this invasion to occur is so that he might be sanctified in the eyes of the nations in light of what is about to occur. God is going to make a serious example of it as well. So that's the reason for God allowing it to happen, because he's going to say, yeah, do it, and then I'm going to show you what's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. Next, we have the destruction of the invaders. Ezekiel 38:17-25 or 23. And so we just looked at the why, And now we're going to be looking at the what and the how. The what and the how. And so, after having described God's purpose, now the answer to the questions of what and how are going to be answered in this passage here, in Ezekiel 38:17-23. Verse 17, it says, Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, Art thou he of whom I spoke in old time by my servants, the prophets of Israel, that prophesied in those days for many years that I would bring thee against them? And it shall come to pass in that day, when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord Jehovah, that my wrath shall come up into my nostrils. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea and the birds of the heavens and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep upon the earth and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. And I will call for a sword against them unto all my mountains, saith the Lord. Every man's sword shall be against his brother, and with pestilence and with blood will I enter into judgment with him, and I will rain upon him, and upon his hordes, and upon the many peoples that are with him, an overflowing shower, and great hailstones, fire and brimstone. And I will magnify myself, and sanctify myself, and I will make myself known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am Jehovah. Now, as to the question of what, with the Russian invasion of Israel, the cup of iniquity that we mentioned before is full. Now, I think the last time I mentioned the term, who's the apple of God's eye? The apple of God's eye is Israel, according to the scriptures. So with the Russian invasion of Israel, the cup of iniquity is full. And for the apple of God's eye is touched. And the wife of Jehovah is violated. Arousing God's anger so that he moves out in judgment. That's in verse 17 and 18. To destroy the invading army. Now this follows. This is followed by the answer to the question of how the invading army is disposed and destroyed. And so, how will it be destroyed? How will Russia be destroyed? Let's look at verse 20 there. There's several causes are listed: an earthquake, verses 19 and 20. Hey, we look at that. And then also verse 21, it says civil war start breaking out among the invading soldiers themselves. And in verse 22, it says that pestilence, blood, flood, there's blood, flood, hailstones, fire, and brimstone in verse 22. Now these things totally destroy this army. I mean, not just Russia, but all of the armies. They destroy them totally, invading this army. And this is without the aid of any other forces from any other nations. This is God taking it personally and totally dealing with this invasion. So here we see that God's purpose is succeeded. It's a success in terms of its objective. And so God is indeed sanctified in the eyes of many people. In verse 23, means the whole world will be witness to this. If we're still alive during this time, it's going to be an amazing, well, not for those that are going to be destroyed by it, but in terms of Bible prophecy, if we haven't been raptured yet and this event is happening, and while we're here, I mean, that we will all but just praise God, because that's fulfillment of prophecy. And also God, would be like the Old Testament times when God showed his might against anyone that came against the people of Israel. It's almost coming back to the Old Testament times of where he will show his hand. And here, that to see Russia destroyed in that way, not just Russia, but all of the other nations involved here. Crazy, eh? Next we'll look at the place of destruction. Place of destruction. Ezekiel 39 verses 1 to 6. Now this follows the law of recurrence. Remember the law of recurrence? Remember, you see the previous chapter gives you sort of a kind of a chronological order, right? An outline, gives you some detail, outline of it. Then what we see here in 39 follows that principle. It's giving you more details of the first chapter. So that's what Ezekiel 39 verses 1 to 6 is going to be doing. It's going to give us more details to the information found in chapter 38. So here we see more description of the invasion and how it's going to be destroyed. Verse 1, it says, "And thou, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, Thus saith the Lord Jehovah, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and I will turn thee about, and will lead thee on, and will cause thee to come up from the uttermost parts of the north, and I will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. And I will smite thy bow out of thy left hand, and will cause thine arrows to fall out of thy right hand. Verse 4, There shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel, thou and all thy hordes, and the peoples that are with thee, I will give thee unto the ravenous birds of every sort, and to the beasts of the field to be devoured. Thou shalt fall upon the open field, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord Jehovah. And I will send a fire on Magog, and on them that dwell securely in the isles. and they shall know that I am Jehovah. That's pretty great, crazy there, eh? So we've got some new information that's added in verses 2 and 4. And the new information is that is where the armies are said to fall specifically, and the specific there is that they are destroyed on the mountains of Israel. So there must be a mountainous area surrounding Israel. I didn't have time to find the maps there, but I might do that in the next session. But just imagine the mountains surrounding Israel, where the invasion is about to begin, but it's in these mountains that God will destroy them. So these mountains obviously extend the length of the center of the country, and it must start at the southern point of the valley of Jezreel, then it ends up into the town of Judah in Galilee. But I'll find in the next season I'll try and find a map doing that to explain to give you visuals on that. But for now, just use your imagination. So these mountains, they've also been famous in terms of biblical times, of biblical cities of Dothan, Shechem, Samaria, Bethel, Bethlehem, and also, most importantly, Jerusalem, which seems to be the goal of the army when they are attacking from that point. Now, in terms of the mountains of Israel, there's a question in your study guide there. It says, when were the mountains of Israel given back to Israel? The mountains were given back 1967. This was during the 6-Day War. So that's the answer to that question in your study guide. When were the mountains of Israel given back to Israel? It was it's only happened since 1967, and that's setting the stage for fulfillment of this prophecy. Now, there's one thing that I just want to note here too, is King James version of this verse 2. It's actually a slight difference there, eh? So just previously in verse 2, let's look at verse 2. It says, and I will turn thee about and will lead thee on, and will cause thee to come up from the uttermost parts of the north, and I will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. Now, what's the difference between, that's the American Standard Version, but look at the King James Version. And I will turn thee back and leave but a sixth part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. The only problem with this translation of the King James Version is that this is actually not how the Hebrew text reads. In fact, King James Version gets it wrong here, because it doesn't mention anything about a sixth of the army remaining. The actual Hebrew text says the whole entire army will be destroyed. There won't be any sixth or part of these, so there won't even be that. So just to note that the King James Version is slightly different there. The main point is that there won't be any survivors. No survivors. Now, Ezekiel 39 verse 6 is another dimension which adds to this Russian invasion, and it says, and I will send a fire on Magog, and on them that dwell securely in the isles, and they shall know that I am Jehovah. See, God is not holding back here, eh? See, not only is the Russian and Allied army is destroyed in Israel, but the other thing too is that not only this army is being destroyed in Israel, but it says here the land of Russia itself will be devastated by the raining of brimstone, causing much destruction in Russia itself. Not only are they fighting in a foreign land, but it says here the country, this is God's wrath now pouring out on Russia. He will destroy Russia by raining brimstone on them too. So this will actually cause Russia to cease being a political force in world affairs. Now, I think if you just pause for a minute and just think about what that would be if we are fortunate to witness that, seeing a great nation like this no longer exist and no longer become part of the political world, that would be That's just huge. I mean, you'll all be watching the news, and for those that study scriptures, and those of us that, for all of us believers that are aware what's happening, that if there's anything that will make you just increase your faith on who God is, when you see that event happening, that will be something. And this is a pre-tribulation event. This is not even the tribulation yet. And of course, what happens there is that there will be a revival that happens in Israel because of that. And of course, it should, and it will cause many Jews to turn to the Lord. Cause many Jews to turn to the Lord. That's what will happen in 39. So here was the sanctification of God's name. And it adds that not only will God's name be sanctified among the Gentile nations, but in Israel as well. So not only will the whole world be looking at this, and they're going to have to be thinking, man, there is a real God. Israel itself will also cause many to have a revival there as well. And my holy name, look at that verse, and my holy name will I make known in the midst of my people Israel. Neither will I suffer my holy name to be profaned anymore. Look, God's had enough, He's saying, man, no longer I'm going to stand back now. When this happens, He's not holding back. And the nations shall know that I am Jehovah, the Holy One in Israel. Can you imagine all the United Nations guys that have always voted or vetted against Israeli sanctions, And then in verse 8, behold, it cometh, and it shall be done, saith the Lord Jehovah. This is the day whereof I have spoken. Now look at next, what's happening here is comes to the 7 years of burning. Ezekiel 39, verses 9 to 10. There's some extra details that we're getting here now. How long will the burning of weapons take place? So after God destroys them, it's going to take 7 years. It's going to take 7 years to dismantle all of the military equipment left behind. But look at that verse 9. It says, and they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth, and shall make fires of the weapons, and burn them, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, and the handstaves, and the spears, and they shall make fires of them 7 years. Verse 10, so that they shall take no wood out of the field, neither cut down any out of the forests, for they shall make fires of the weapons. And they shall plunder those that plundered them, and rob those that robbed them, saith the Lord Jehovah. That's some crazy stuff there, This is almost Mad Max stuff, and these big budget movies, This is something that, yes, if those of us are privileged to see it, would be it would be an amazing thing that is happening. But 7 years it takes. That's a testimony of how big this army is, So the next we have, it takes 7 months of burying. So burial. It talks about, so after the army is destroyed, what we see is that there's a description of the burying of the dead for 7 months. Burying of the dead for 7 months. I won't read that, but you can read that in your own time. But how long will it take in terms of trying to find these bodies and burying them? It takes 7 months to bury this huge army. So, imagine the recovering of all of these, the carnage, Now the burial itself will be in one of the valleys east of the Mediterranean Sea. In verse 11 there it says, the valley of Hamon-Gog. And that would put it in, from looking at Arnold's notes, it puts it in the Jordan Valley above the Dead Sea. I'll get some maps on it next week, but I'll try and remember to do that. But anyway, the main thing is that the burial place would be in the Jordan Valley. That's where the burial place will be, and it will take 7 months to do the job. So there will be a cemetery overlooking the cemetery. A new city will be built, and this city will be built and named Hamona, and that name means multitude in verse 16. Now these 7 months, just take note because we're going to finish now. But I guess the main thing to take away is, we'll conclude this next Wednesday, but the main thing is that these 7 months of burying and 7 years of burning is going to be crucial for us to use that as a time frame of where this event will confirm where this event will actually happen, because some people say this will happen in the mid-tribulation, but we'll just keep note that how the length of these things will help us when we talk about it again next Wednesday, how this would fit. And also will also help, because next week we'll be looking at the different views of the pre-tribulation views, mid-tribulation views, post-tribulation views, and we'll use this the 7 months and 7 years to help us to look at those views. So remember, for any view to be correct, it must satisfy the requirements of these 7 months and 7 years. So that's why the 7 months, 7 years that we're talking about here is crucial for us to, in terms of satisfying the requirements of those views to be correct. But anyway, that's us for tonight,